Got to get it in. It'll come into Valanciunas. Back to Ingram for the win. Yes!
I love it. This is what stars do. This is what stars do.
And he's back in his game, his rhythm.
He's young. He's entering his prime. By no means is he sort of a finished product.
For what it's worth, Bobby Webster insisted that they're not going to change their goals for this season because of the Ingram trade. I'm encouraged to hear that the Raptors are going to try and pull this off, but a little bit skeptical that they're actually going to be able to execute it.
Welcome to Basketball Island. The All-Star Weekend disappointed. The Raptors front office at the deadline did not. I'm Wes Chang here, replacing Chris Hine once again. You know Fab, you know Hambone, but once again, we got ourselves a special guest. We got Prestige up in the building today. We got the one and only Josh Lewenberg. Let's little snap round of applause. All right, Josh, thanks for coming on, man.
The chair was still lowered from Javon being here the other day, so we had to. I got a booster seat. I'm sitting on like 3 or 4 phone books.
Hey, man, Josh, you know the life. Me and you, man, we share that life, right? Gotta stay around Javon a little
Short
too much,
kings.
you know. Short Kings represent, all right?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. All right. So as we mentioned, look, the Raptors front office, I think that's what we all want to talk about at this point. Obviously, gameplay not back up until Friday, so we got a little bit of time here. But Josh, let's get right to it, all right? We got you on the hot seat right away. We want to come out swinging. Look, we all know a lot of people were skeptical of the trade when it first went down. You were one of them, but obviously your tone has changed over time as more and more information has came through. What's been the biggest thing that's changed from your initial reaction to where you feel about the trade now?
Look, I think we have more information now. So the biggest thing is obviously that it sounds like this is a team that is committed to the short-term plan, right? Like, Bobby Webster made that very clear that they're still going to be approaching the rest of this year as a rebuild. They're not prioritizing the play-in all of a sudden. And like, kind of funny and speaks to tanking culture that a team makes a big trade and their top talking point the day after is like, don't worry, we're still going to be bad. But like, no, like jokes aside, it helps. It makes a big difference because assuming that the long-term goal is to compete for championships, not be a play-in team or even just be a playoff team, you need top 10, top 15 caliber players to do it. At least one, probably 2. Scotty might be that guy. They believe he can be that guy. The question then now is like, is Ingram your number 2? He's 27, so I'm not sure that we've seen him at the height of his powers yet, but can he be the second best player on a championship team? Based on what we've seen through 9 years, I would say no. So where are you going to find that guy? Best way to find it is in the draft. The draft. And they know that. This is a prime opportunity and probably the last one that they're going to get too, right? Because they've made it pretty clear next year they want to start pushing forward. So they're in a good position to have a real shot at a top player in a top heavy draft. So the fact that it's going to be hard, right? Like we've seen what the schedule looks like at the end of the season. It's not going to be easy, but I'm encouraged to hear that they're going to try. And then the extension, like that helps too, because all of a sudden now, like you've given Ingram his money. You can say, okay, you got paid now. You don't have to spend the rest of the season proving anything or showing anything ahead of the summer. Take the rest of the year off, potentially, and get healthy for next season. That could potentially help the tank too. And from what I hear, that's still on the table potentially. We might not see Brandon Ingram this year.
Interesting.
That would be interesting.
Hold on. So let's go back real quick.
Yeah.
So again, you came out guns a-blazing after the trade. We had spoken before the trade deadline, after the deadline. I think to me it's safe to say your major concern was that the Raptors would not uphold the tank, right? That was a big thing. I think that was like,
so this helps.
Yeah,
for
you're
sure.
adding a player. Bobby Webster comes out, puts his, which again, in disbelief when he said it, but it's good to hear it, the clarity in that regard.
The extension too, because now you don't need to like evaluate him or see what he looks like before paying him. You've already done it.
You bring him into your program, you get him assimilated with the guys, and you can build towards next season, which seems to be the goal. This is very much a gamble on the player. Do you believe Brandon Ingram is the guy you can put alongside Scotty Barnes, alongside whoever the draft pick is, which is the ultimate variable? Beside the point about, the fact that the Raptors are going to tank. They've said they're going to try their best to do it, and they better try their best.
I was going to ask if we're allowed to swear.
You're
on this
allowed
thing,
to
so
swear.
that helps.
Occasionally. Try not to overdo it, but
You are such a moron. Your language is offensive. Shut up.
Connor's got some work to do.
hold on a second though. Does Ingram not represent more of like a transitionary player at this point? 2-year
hope
contract.
not.
Well, but what if he's not working out? Aren't you glad the term of the contract is shorter? Like, would you rather had Ingram on a 4-year deal or a 2-year plus option?
I'd take him on a 4-year if you could.
You would?
If you could,
I
yeah.
think it might be more beneficial to have him on a shorter term because we don't know exactly how he's going to play out.
Well, that's why this got done in the way that it did, because like the Raptors have historically prioritized term over salary in these contract negotiations, and I think now more than ever because of his injury history, like they were not giving him a 4 or 5 year deal, which he would have been eligible for in free agency. So like the player and his camp were probably pushing for something closer to what would have been a max extension, 48 a year. The Raptors, from what I hear, would have been more comfortable at like 30 to 35. I would have been more comfortable at 30 to 35.
I think we all would have been, right?
But I think like this was the compromise that they were probably always going to land on. I know that the people that are actually, and I was anti-trade. I'm actually not anti-extension because I think at the point that you make the trade, you obviously have to lock them up. And I just think that like 40 is where you were ending up regardless. I know people say like, well, who are you bidding against? And I agree. Like there wasn't a long line of teams clamoring to pay Brandon Ingram
It's the Canada
$40
tax,
million.
though, man.
There's that, and then also like, had they gone to free agency, especially if the Raptors, if term was a sticking point, all the player has to say is like, man, you gave up a first round pick for me. You're really not going to re-sign me? And all of a sudden, like, there's your leverage. They were going to end up at 3 years, 120 regardless. And as I said, like, they got it done early. And Hambone, to your question, like, what makes me feel differently about the trade? I don't really feel all that differently about, and we'll get to that, about the risks and about like the fit and the timing. But we talked about the tank, stay in the tank, and I'm happy about that. But also like, and this is what I wrote about the other day, it's very clear now too that he wants to be here.
Yep.
The trade speaks to that and the extension speaks to that. I don't think it's everything, but I also don't think it's nothing. And I always said this with DeMar DeRozan too. Similar player in a way too, where like really good player, not perfect, flawed, right? But like even with his flaws, and even though he was not always the best fit, certainly for the modern game, but also for the way that the Raptors wanted to play, he was a star player that wanted to play in Toronto. And in a market like this, that matters. This matters. This means something that Ingram wants to be here.
For sure.
So, like, those are the reasons why, if you want to use the word, like, soften my view, I've maybe softened my view. But I'm still skeptical about his durability.
For sure.
For obvious reasons. I'm still skeptical about the fit and the basketball fit, and I'm still skeptical about the timing of everything. And maybe we can get more into that, because I still think, like, people associate risk with cost. They didn't pay a lot here. So people say like low risk, low cost, low risk. To me, like those things aren't always tied together. And I use the example, Fab and I were talking earlier, and I've used this before too, is like the Rudy Gay trade is at the time, like they're still in a growing phase. You're still trying to see what you have in your young guys. You're trying to develop your young guys. You bring in a player who's going to be making a lot of money, getting a lot of touches, taking a lot of shots. If it's not the right player at the right time, all of a sudden you're stunting the growth of those other players. So that to me is the risk. And I'm not saying this isn't going to work. I'm not saying necessarily that he's not the right fit, but necessarily.
One more time, Josh.
Clarifiers. Yeah.
But if he's not, this sets you back. And not in a way like they are a better team than they were a few weeks ago. But, like, to what end? Are they going to be a championship contending team as a result of Brandon Ingram? Maybe if they get a great pick in this draft, they will
But
be.
it's tied to the pick.
ultimate
It's
goal.
all tied to the
All
pick
tied to
anyway,
the
though,
pick.
right? Because whether you brought in Ingram or not, okay, if you let Bruce Brown expire or you had to buy him out, that's not a win either. So whether you're using your cap space on Ingram or not, it's all about what you're getting in this draft. And before I forget, the idea of the contract and who are you bidding against, do you really want to start the relationship off with,
Yeah, exactly.
okay, Brandon, go test free agency. Maybe we can save a few bucks. Like, let's start off on a good foot.
100%.
Maybe we have to overpay you a little bit, but for the relationship between him and the team, you'd rather just like, let's be amicable to start this off.
how it works.
You don't
one
want to
thing-
tell Rich Paul.
Yeah, sorry,
Go
Rich.
test
You know
the
what, Rich
market?
Paul? Go test the market. We want to pay him 37 and a half.
I mean, ultimately, like, the player option on the third year is something I feel uncomfortable about. I would have rather locked him in
Raptors
before.
love their player up.
Bet on yourself,
But
man. It's a Raptor
they did it
theme,
with,
baby.
Did it with Gary Trent Jr. and that backfired hard. Like,
Yeah.
I think to me, it's just I would prefer longer term to bring him in to have a little more commitment, especially because of how difficult it is to bring talent to Toronto.
I don't mind it here, like a little incentive for a guy that hasn't been healthy.
Definitely
Get
some
healthy,
incentive.
stay healthy, get back to your all-star caliber play, and like he's going to be 29.
Maybe
at
he
that
sticks
stage.
around anyway.
Maybe he sticks around, but he's going to be highly motivated, I would imagine.
Yeah, but one thing I want to bring up here that we all kind of seem in consensus of saying, I think a lot of the people who are frustrated with, or was frustrated with the trade, it's the situation relating to the tank and the draft. There was a lot of promise about what Cooper Flag. We've heard it so many times.
close your ears, Fab, close your ears.
We've heard it so many times, but I want to point out the point where that ship kind of sailed wasn't so much on the front office; it was the players.
Yeah.
The players went out and won 8 out of 10 games in a stretch. They weren't supposed to win more than 2 or 3 of them, and they just go and blow the doors off their opponents. Is that situation in the season worth saying that's why they had to make a pivot, or do you think the front office was committed to doing something like this prior to all that winning, anyways?
Yeah.
They wanted to tank. Like,
Oh, yeah.
they wanted to tank.
Yeah.
That streak was an aberration. Like, we talked about it at the time. Like, this was the worst case scenario.
Schedule was easier. They were healthier than they had been at any point. But that's the point is like, even if we take Ingram out of the equation here, and like I said, I think there's a chance that he might be. We heard Darko Rajakovic talking the other day, and to me, that was more telling than anything else.
Yeah.
He said a few things. One, they're going to reevaluate him in 2-week increments. That means that it's not going to be 2 weeks. It's probably not going to be 2 weeks after that. So, like,
love that.
reading
2 weeks away
between the
from
lines
being
there.
2 weeks away.
He also said, like, there's a chance we don't see him this season. So let's take him out of that for now, for the tanking, talking purposes, and say you've got Yak, you've got RJ, you've got IQ, and you've got Scotty. And even with 3 of those guys on the floor, we've seen, like, this is a team that can be pretty competitive, and that schedule is cake.
It's the worst.
Some of those games are going to be harder to lose than they would be to win. So yeah, like you've got to get serious. You've got to get serious about this thing if you're because the teams that are serious, this is the time of the year.
Yep.
Post All-Star, post trade deadline. This is the time of year that the teams that are serious about tanking get real serious. And we saw it with the Raptors in Tampa. They were not subtle. They were pretty shameless. And like this team has more talent on it than most of the tanking teams. So you can't.
They
can't
need to
be
do
subtle.
the exact same thing and worse.
You know what?
Yeah.
It's a shame that the snowstorm wasn't over the course of the Raptors schedule because they could have given the Ayton excuse.
Yeah, that's
Scotty
right.
Barnes could have said, I couldn't shovel my driveway. I'm going to have to miss the next 3 games.
Do whatever it takes.
Right? It would have been perfect. So for anyone who's not in
I could
Toronto,
dig- I
we
could
are
dig out
we
my
are
car-
living in snow right
I
now.
could dig out my car this morning, so that excuse is not like insane.
So we're talking around it. We're dancing around it. Like now we're kind of getting to the whole tank thing. The most important thing for the future of this franchise
Yes.
is for them to nail this pick.
I have a question.
Bar none.
I have a question for you. So if this is like a seesaw and we're trying to balance out like what's the most successful outcome of this season? Now, would you like say the Raptors end up with like the 7th best lottery odds, but quickly finds his groove? The young guys
No.
start to show more promise. Is that worth it, or is just the pick just the best pick possible? Like what? Like would you trade a little bit of that for draft capital?
It's a shame because I do think, like, in addition to getting a good pick, a top priority this season was getting this young core time together, build chemistry, evaluate them, see what you have in them, which I think is even more important now that you've added Ingram. Is like, you need to see what you have in these other guys that, in the case of Quickly, you've already paid. In the case of RJ, up for an extension.
We'll talk about that.
The problem is that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
That needed to happen in the first half of the season, and unfortunately couldn't happen because of the injuries.
Yeah.
Like, you can't afford to do that now. If the draft pick is the top priority it needs to be. Bobby Webster just told us last week that the draft is a top priority. If that's the case, like all that other stuff is kind of out the window now.
It's a double-edged sword, though, right? Because the injuries which stopped you from seeing the core play more together also probably got you a worse record. So, like, there's pros and cons to all of these situations, right?
But now that you're here, now that we're here,
we're here now. We are here.
It's been written. There have been injuries, unfortunate circumstances. It's
lean into it.
Exactly.
Steer into it.
But you got to thread a needle. So I'm big on make sure those practices are electric. Even if Ingram is back, healthy, feeling good, Quickly's good. You're pulling strings on guys. You're sitting guys out strategically against weaker opponents. And you're making those practices almost like a training camp. Like you're letting those guys go hard when they're all healthy. And you're building chemistry that way. You're just not going to do it on the floor. In my opinion, that's the way you kind of have to do this. And we'll segue into this. Looking to next year and beyond, the draft pick here, let's assume they end up with like top 5, top 7 pick, whatever. You add that to this core already. Josh, we're up against it, man, here.
Yeah.
Like, do you think that there's a subsequent move that needs to be made? Like, is this the team we're going to be seeing next year? Are you confident in saying that? Quickly, Barrett, Barnes, Pirtle, Ingram, draft pick, Grady. That's 7 guys. They're getting paid a lot of money.
Well, Walter's not going anywhere.
Walters.
Mobo's probably. I mean, you need cheap guys to fill out your bench now, right?
You got 3 rookies in there.
Abaji's there too, who's like making around like $6 million as well. So like it starts adding up quickly. I think to me, you get a look at this core. Ideally, you see it this year, end of this year, while also losing games. Very hard needle to thread. But like, are there moves coming? Like, what exactly is the plan here?
That's another reason why this pick is valuable. I've seen some people say like, well, you don't need a top pick anymore. You have Brandon Ingram, but like,
I want both.
Yes, exactly. But like,
let's get both.
Kawhi said, expletive that. Let's go get them both.
Chips with the dip, baby.
You know why? You know what's pretty valuable when you're a team that's getting close to the tax and you're kind of locked into a core and you're not quite good enough yet to be a championship contender? What's pretty valuable in that case is really good players on rookie deals.
Yep.
So like another reason why they need to get a top pick in this draft. It's really tight now. And we talked about like hemming and hawing over a few $1 million in the Ingram trade or the Ingram extension, like $37 million. Like those,
the margins are a lot thinner now on what you can do with the roster, but you have some malleability, right? Like there's nothing to say next trade deadline one of these guys can't be dealt. Like they could always pivot in that situation. What if Quickly comes out next year, has a great start to the season, but you've drafted a guard? Maybe you say, you know what? We have to make this move. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying you have guys who could be moved,
that's
right?
Extremely Raptors-y way to think is like flexibility. Let's see what happens and then make a decision from there. They love to do that. It's helped them in the past and it's hurt them in the past, but I can absolutely see them, even if they are, because like I think they have like something like $10 million, $10.5 million before they hit the tax line with the 11 players that they have under contract. You need to fit in the first round pick. You need to add at least 2 more players in order to hit the roster minimum. They're probably, unless there's another big move to be made over the summer, they're probably going to be into the tax a little bit. But remember, tax doesn't get charged until after game 82. Yes. I can totally see them
pivot,
going into next season saying like, let's see what this looks like, and then we can pivot. And it might bite them in the ass because they might get to the trade deadline and be like, oh man, like maybe there isn't a huge market for
player X, yeah.
Maybe they need to attach a pick.
That would be awful.
And that's why I say like it's so hard to judge the Ingram trade right now in that like there's so many questions that will determine whether or not this is successful. And that for me is why I'm skeptical, because like a trade you feel really good about is one that's like, oh, this is a no-brainer. This is a home run, a slam dunk, no matter what. This is another part of it is like what happens in a year from now if you're stuck and you see that this team, maybe their ceiling isn't as high as you thought. And you're like, okay, well, we need to move RJ, but there's not a market for RJ. We need to also attach picks to this.
Yeah.
I'm going to feel differently about the Ingram trade as a result of that.
A lot of
variables. The health, the fit, all of it. So, like...
He's softened, Raptors fans. He's softened on the Ingram deal. You heard it here. He is no longer blasting the trade.
Can we deal with this too, right? Because, look, I don't read my mentions. I used to.
Smart man.
I used to.
Smart man.
I used to. I don't now. It's not easy to do because like it's human nature. You want to see people are talking about you. You want to see what they're saying, but like I'm a fairly new father. I've had some health issues recently too, so I think I'm at a point in life where I have a pretty good sense of what's important. And with all due respect to the trolls and the haters, you ain't it.
Good.
You ain't
Let
it.
them know. Let them know, Josh.
But I hear things.
It's entertaining.
Things pop up on my feed, so I know what people are saying. And I actually, to clarify, I have no problem with people disagreeing.
No,
with my
of course
take.
not. That's your
I
job.
love it. That's my job, and that's why this is fun. This is what we're doing right
Yeah.
now. This is sports. You're allowed to disagree. You're allowed to have your own opinion. That's encouraged. Ideally, you would voice that and share that in a respectful way that isn't yelling and screaming and getting personal. But look, it's 2025.
Yeah, that's how it
It's
goes.
social media, that's how it goes.
I'll say-
I get that too, and I don't have a problem with that either. Where I actually took issue with some of this stuff is this ridiculous narrative that I'm the only one that's questioned the trade.
But you were, right?
I appreciate your patronage, but maybe read literally anybody else but me who isn't employed by the team.
Yeah.
And that's like the Venn diagram, the closer you are to MLSC and Masai is like the better you feel about this trade from what I've seen. And I'm okay with that too, because like you got to do what you got to do to get paid.
Do you get dirty looks when you walk into the scrums at this point? Does anyone kind of shooting you like,
that's
hey,
what we want.
you know, like,
We want
you know,
that.
that's, but you know, as someone who works for TSN, I'll say you do a great job covering them. You're very informative, so it's a good follow on Twitter.
One of my bosses is sitting to my left. And I'm pretty sure that he would echo this, is like, we don't go into these things saying like, we need to be more negative or we need to be more positive. We need to be real.
Speak your truth.
We
my
tell the
friend.
truth here, man.
Tell the truth.
We want to be authentic. We want to be balanced. We want to be fair. We want to be nuanced. And at the end of the day, I'm a journalist. I'm not a hype man. So, like, but at the same time, like, yes, a lot of people have questioned this trade. A lot of people are
for sure.
skeptical about this trade. But, and this is where people have to get over everything these days is like black and white. There's a lot of gray. There's a lot of nuance, as we like to say. I haven't seen anybody saying like, this trade is the worst trade ever. This is a disaster. It can't work. Fire Masai. Like, I'm not saying any of those things either. I think it's possible to be able to say like, this is a murky fit. Weird timing, while also acknowledging Ingram is a great player who wants to be here.
Big thing, yeah.
And those things aren't mutually exclusive. So, like, that's where I stand on this.
Well, Josh, just to give you some solidarity on this pod, all right, we were also murky. We never came out swinging one way or the other. And I think that's the way you do have to approach this trade because, like you said, there are multiple stakeholders involved. It's not like somebody got completely fleeced one side or the other. But you mentioned something that I feel like this is a good time to bring it up. So the front office, they're kind of taking a pretty big swing with this trade. They're putting their name, their stake on the line here. So Brandon Ingram, I think we understand there's a talent evaluation that this front office has for BI that maybe not everyone else realizes the full potential of him yet. Do you think though at this juncture, like all the things you mentioned of where this organization is at, does this put Bobby Webster and Masai kind of on the line here? Their names are now attached to this being kind of almost an all-in move.
Yeah, like the benefit of the doubt, I think, is over. Like, they did what they did, and they deserve all the credit in the world for it. Building a championship team. Their legacy here is, like, set. That's not going anywhere. Yeah. But at the same time, like, there are no free passes now. I think what the championship did was earn them the right to see them through what comes next. The post-championship era, the post-We the North era, whatever you want to call it, to see them through the rebuild. Masai, like, was sitting at the podium in April and said, like, these rebuilds, they could take 3 to 6 years. They were never going to take, with MLSC and Masai and just the market in general, this was never going to take 3 to 6 years. But they've essentially now tried to do this in 1.5. They'll say that, like, next year is part of the rebuild, still growing, but, like, no, they're going to be pushing for the playoffs next year. They're trying to do this thing in an expedited timeline, which is fine if it works. If it doesn't, like, they've got to wear that. They've got to be accountable for that. So, yeah, like, in the same way, Rudy Gay was Brian Colangelo's gambit. That was on him. This is Masai. And by the way, like I've heard too, like Masai was pushing hard. Like Brandon Ingram was his guy. And like Bobby Webster is the general manager. I think the world of Bobby. He's a great executive. But this has always been the Masai Ujiri production, the Masai Ujiri show. So this shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone.
Yeah.
This is his move. So yeah, like whether it works or not, like that's going to be on him. And to be clear about this too is like when I say whether it works, I don't mean like, oh, they make the play-in next year, they make the playoffs next year, so it's worked. We're probably not going to know if this works for a few years, for 3 or 4 years, and for it to work, connected to the pick obviously too, for it to work, they have to grow into a championship contending team. In the long term. That has to be the end goal.
Well, that's the standard now, right?
Yep. If they end up where they started, if they end up with a team that's the same level of talent, the same level of skill and ceiling as the Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet team, then all of this will have been for naught.
Do we know for certain that Masai and Bobby are going to be around enough to see this through?
Well, we don't know. No one knows
That's
that.
the thing,
But-
right?
but-
So it's a gambit. It's a big gambit again. And it's really comes down, and you alluded to it. This is Masai's gamble on Brandon Ingram. He thinks he's a piece. Now, he's got the benefit of the doubt based on what we've done in the past, right? Like Rudy Gay gets traded for 4 role players, and then you end up going on a massive We the North run that helped lead to the Kawhi trade, which was one of the best deals in NBA history, a huge poker move, all in. So it's funny that very tumultuous path to get here. You can make the argument that Masai and Bobby kind of failed Pascal Siakam era. You didn't get what you probably should have for him. You probably traded him a year too late. I didn't like the OG Anunoby trade at the time. That again, still TBD. I don't know if this fails. Like if next year is not good, are they around?
Ownership change atop MLSC.
We'll see though. Okay, the internal, idea of what they think they could be next year should probably be what, if you're looking at the East, a 4 to 6 seed. Is that where they think? No, a 6 seed. Do they think they can get to that point?
Top 6.
Yeah, you're pushing.
I think top 6 should be the goal based on what these moves you've made now, right? But now, if you're a fan looking at this, and Masai and Bobby have another year after this on their contracts, do you want a change? Are you happy with what they're doing? The grass is always greener. I don't know what the alternative would be, so I'm not sure if I'm.
There's a hint of desperation with the move. There's a slight hint, like you're expediting a rebuild. So if Masai said that 3 to 6 years,
3 to 6 years,
and then the next season makes this kind of trade, is there? I didn't mind the trade. It's a big gamble on the player, but I can't help but look to the future and be like, there's a hint of desperation.
Tell me
that
this:
comes with it.
what if OKC? 2 years ago, as they were in this growing stage, what if they had done something like this? What would that have meant to the growth and development of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Chet Holmgren, Jalen Williams? What would it have meant to those guys to have expedited the process? That's where the risk is here. Everyone low cost. You didn't give up much. You didn't mortgage your future. There's no risk. There's still a risk here if this doesn't work. So, and by the way, I mentioned OKC. This is another thing too, is teams were not lining up to go trade for Brandon Ingram. Anyone could have done it. Yeah. He was available for 2 years. He was on the block. Anyone could have bought low. There are the teams that are in the rebuilding conversation. Brooklyn has a ton of assets. Those teams could have looked at this in the same way the Raptors did and said, this is the guy that's going to help us get to the next step. Or the OKCs, the Houstons, who are also sitting on a boatload of assets, could have said, they know they're one piece away. They didn't think this was their piece. So the Raptors are betting on him. There weren't a lot of teams that were willing to do it. They think that they can get something out of Brandon Ingram that no one else thought that they could get. They might be right, but
it's bold.
It's bold.
But the OKC comparison for me doesn't work as well because I don't think the Raptors are sitting on the blue chippers that OKC does. They're not sitting on Holmgren, Shea, J-Dub. They don't have 3 guys like that on their roster. So it's a little tough of a comparison for me where I think the Raptors needed to upgrade their talent, whereas OKC was we have guys. They just need time, right? Where I don't know if you can look at the Raptors' young guys and say they're anywhere near that
Did they
level.
know SGA was going to be an MVP?
No,
Did they know
no,
Jalen Williams
no.
was going to be an all-star? Like, and it was the Rudy Gay thing too. Like,
Yeah.
DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry certainly aren't SGA.
No.
Like, but at the same time, like, we didn't know what they were.
Yeah.
The Raptors didn't know what they were. But they needed to find out, and they chose not to.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until Masai came in and removed that piece
Yeah.
where those guys really got a chance to breathe.
But they were like Chet and J-Dub are still high lottery picks, right? So you have to have that, at least the idea of that kind of upside.
OKC pulled some shameful too, right? They sat Shea like the second half of
If you had
seasons.
Shea in fantasy, you were like, oh, he's just not playing this month.
he's just sitting out March. Like,
Yeah.
but
One of my buddies asked me for fantasy this year if they should go all in on Emmanuel quickly, and I'm like, you could have a great year, but like, if this is a head-to-head league and you need him for the
I
playoffs,
have Jakob Poeltl in fantasy.
Yeah.
I don't know when.
I
the
mean,
guy's
I have
gonna play.
Barnes and I'm sweating it. At this point, I don't know how much he's going to play.
So for the good of the Raptors, though, they need to kind of pull this. So, it's funny. Like
we're going to be hearing a lot about this Jakob Poeltl hip pointer over the next.
Yes, we will. That's how it goes, right? Like, but one of the things too, I think everybody is always glorifying, the full tank, the all-in, 2 feet in tank. I think the problem is this Raptors team isn't as equipped to do that as the Washingtons of the world, as the Utahs of the world. They're not in the same situation, so not all tanks are created equal.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to get your opinion about it. For the front office to make this move, do you think, which side of the scale does it weigh more? Do you think it's they saw a good buy low opportunity on a player they like in Brandon Ingram, or do you think they recognize that this team's win now window is earlier than the horizon for your traditional tank team?
the latter, I think. Like, dude, like Sam Mitchell brings it up all the time. Scotty Barnes, second contract. Quickly, second contract.
Yeah.
RJ Barrett, second contract. Scotty Barnes, obviously 25% of your max, right? So you're going to be up against it every single season for the next 2-3 years. Like, you're going to be up against that, the tax, the first apron. You needed to do something now, in my opinion. So, Masai said 3 to 6 years. If that were the case, trades were coming, right?
Yeah.
Like, who's to say that Scotty Barnes isn't going to be like,
100%.
We're losing, I want out. So I felt like there was a pressure. It's starting to feel a little bit more like that. Like, obviously, when we go over the trade from every angle, which I think we have, very nuanced take on it, I can't help but think that there was a need to expedite this slightly, and I think their actions prove that.
I don't know if you guys have heard, but we're celebrating Vince Carter this year.
First I'm hearing it.
Fab, definitely.
And there's a
Fab's boy.
lesson. And there's a lesson to be learned there.
Can't get him out of my life, man. Hey, Vince, I'm Fabio. All I want to know is, why can't you apologize publicly for how things ended in Toronto?
I know.
I just keep seeing him everywhere I turn.
He is everywhere.
Teams. There's a lesson to be learned there too, right? Like, they didn't do what they could to surround him with the right pieces.
Yep.
And you wait, you sit on your hands, and eventually the guy's like, well, okay, well, are you serious about winning or not? I want out. And since the Vince Carter situation and the decades that have followed, we've seen it even more. And now that timeline has shrunk to the point where, like, even guys like on the rookie contract or just after their rookie contract in some cases have said, like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
I had somebody recently criticizing even the San Antonio trade, and I love going out and getting De'Aaron Fox, but a few people are like, is it too early? It's like, it's never too early to show your guy, and especially if it's Wemby.
Sure.
Show your guy that you're serious about winning. So I get that. I get that side of it. And I do think there's something there too, is like, we need to get moving. We can't wait 3 to 6 years.
It all comes down to the pick. Once again, everything comes down to the pick.
Yeah.
If you somehow end up with Cooper Flag or
Whoa.
I'm saying somehow. Listen, if you want to peddle dreams to Raptors fans about Cooper Flag, what's the percentage, man? Like, we're talking about a very
But
minor
take
percentage.
their shot. The Raptors.
No, but they are.
And they had a chance to take their shot at Wemby. They didn't. Take your shot. You can't guarantee Cooper Flag. You can't guarantee any of these
But you
guys.
can get a potential all-star in the draft,
Well,
and that's what you're hoping
but
for.
take your shot. But taking a shot gets you at most 14%. It's not like 25.
But that's
the way
all you can
are.
do.
Right? So, and then you look at this last year's
I'm not
draft.
going to be angry
No,
if
I know.
the lottery gods are vengeful and they don't get a good pick. I'm not going to say, like, that would be completely like reactionary thinking, but if they can put themselves in a position, you're right, like, they were never ever catching Washington and Utah. That was never going to happen.
impossible.
It's not going to happen, but they don't need to be the worst, but they need to be in the conversation. They need to give themselves a shot.
Yep.
If they can do that, and again, I don't think that Ingram is going to be, but maybe he is. Maybe they bring him back for 8 games, And even if it's 8 games, he's good enough and the schedule is bad enough that they probably win like 6 of those, and then all of a sudden you're in some trouble.
I'll leave the Raptors fans with a little bit of hope here. Let's not forget Atlanta was the team that got the first overall draft pick last year. They weren't tanking.
No, they were not.
They were the 10th team. So the Raptors, they're going to land somewhere in the middle, not all the way down there, not the 10th, but we'll see how the lottery balls bounce, and we'll see. We'll see whether.
You mentioned Wemby.
Oh, we got one quick tie-in.
I assume that's why you brought me on today, is just
Let's do
to
it.
gloat.
Let them know.
So we're still a gambling pod to some extent. Josh and I had a bet. Wembanyama, Defensive Player of the Year. Wemby versus the field. I took Wemby. I gave Josh the entire field. This is that summer league of last year. How much you want to? It's a. I don't even know if you want to say the number.
Don't disclose the amount.
Amount not required.
Look,
No.
it's a debt into his son's college fund. That's
We were in Vegas at the time for Summer League, and we had a few bevies already, and the Vegas of it all probably
Swept you.
It is infatuating. It does that.
I stand by my reasoning and my logic at the time. Like, yeah, Wemby, it was the clear favorite for the award. Now, obviously, a bigger favorite for the award. But whenever you have the opportunity to take the field in a situation like this,
It just feels so good, right?
With a 65-game minimum,
Yeah.
too. And also, like, another part of it, too, was that
Have you seen Wemby stretch?
the last...
You haven't heard about the stretching
I've seen
enough.
his flexibility.
He's big. The last 12 winners of the award have come from teams that have won at least 48 games, top 5 in their conference, ranked top 3 in the NBA in defense, and the Spurs will be none of those things. They're
not even
19th in
close.
defense, up from 21 last year. That was my thinking. This
You're correct. Your read was correct, but Wemby different, man.
Wemby-
Yeah,
Wemby
you're counting
different.
on
and that's
Earthlings.
I would assume that's the Hambone calculus, where it's like, this guy is going to break a lot of rules over the course of his career.
Yeah.
He broke some rules over the weekend, too. That's what I should have bet, is that he'd get disqualified from the skills competition.
Yeah, cap the CP3. Yeah.
I love that.
And also,
I love
look, like, he's the future face of the league, and the media votes, and there's a storyline there. People are going to want to vote for Wemby, and you can't stop momentum. So let's maybe talk about my buyout options.
All right, yeah, we'll have to bring you back on. We'll do some off-camera buyout options. But as always, that's a wrap for Basketball Island. As always.
Hold on. We don't want to talk about that all-star abomination.
No.
That's it, eh?
No.
No, this is we brought Josh on. We brought Josh on to do some serious Raptors talk, and I think the people got what they wanted. Air your grievances. And
I
you
got
know
a
what?
lot of problems with you people.
You can come into the comments and do the same. Air them back at Josh. But as always, thank you for watching on YouTube. Please like and subscribe where you can, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.
Wemby Depoy, baby.
And just a reminder, in celebration of the 25th anniversary of Vince Carter's iconic dunk, Bell is thrilled to officially launch Bell Skycam. Fans across Canada can recreate Vince Carter's iconic dunk against any skyline through this immersive AR experience. Share your video on social media for a chance to win autographed Vince Carter jerseys and Raptors tickets.